All right, so chapter 6 is about study, memory, and test taking. Okay, so those are three topics that we're going to be focusing on. Hopefully, these are some questions to consider. You've said you know how to set aside enough time to study. Um, are you able to cram and still get good results? What is your feeling towards all-nighters? And do you still do a lot of studying, but don't feel you're as successful as you should be? That's probably an indicator that you need to change your study techniques. Okay, so we're going to talk about memory, some note-taking strategies to strengthen your memory, how to study more effectively and kind of study smarter, not harder. And we're talking about test-taking strategies as well. Okay, so in memory, we're going to talk about working memory, difference between working and short-term memory, what that means. What are some things that prohibit you from remembering things, like if you're taking a test and you can't remember a formula or something like that? How you should memorize and when you should memorize things, and what you should memorize, and how do you make your short and long-term memory better. Okay, so let's talk about the three different types of memory: long-term, short-term, and working memory. Okay, so whenever you remember something, your brain is doing three things. It's encoding. It's kind of making sense of what you are hearing or seeing or learning about. And then it's going to go into your brain and be stored there. And then when you're taking a test, you're going to retrieve that information for, whatever that test question is. Okay. So you might learn all the planets. Your brain's going to understand all the planets. And then when you ask a question that has list all the, planets in the solar system, your brain's going to retrieve that information so you can get that answer right on a test. So you're going to acquire, retain, and then make use of all that information. Okay, so working memory. This is when you have something that you're doing actively. So for example, let's say your mom says, "Oh, can you please go to the grocery store and get me milk, eggs, and bread?" Okay, milk, eggs, and bread. You're going to remember that. You're going to go to the store, you're going to get it. 2 months from now, if I asked you on, July 9th, what were the three items your mom asked you to get at the grocery store? You're gonna be like, I have no idea, right? You kind of use it and then forget it. Okay, that's working memory. Short-term memory, it's when you can recall recent information. This would be like, hearing a song and knowing the words to a jingle, because you heard it, once or twice. You may not remember it 20 years from now, but if you just heard it on the radio, that's something that you might recall. Or it could be studying for a test. You reviewed your notes, you took a quiz, and then you've probably been in a situation where you learned information, took a quiz, walked out, and then totally forgot everything that you just learned, right? It's because it was only in your short-term memory. Long-term memory are things that you have consistently done over and over again, or makes a lot of sense for you to remember. And what our goal is for you to learn well enough that what's in your short-term memory becomes long-term memory. My favorite scene in a movie regarding this is from the movie Inside Out. If you've never seen the movie Inside Out, Riley has all this information in her memory that fades, and then it goes to the dump if she doesn't use it, like how to play the piano. She may have at one time known several songs by heart, but as time goes on, that information kind of fades away. So that's in the short-term memory, never made it to the long-term memory. Okay, some things that prohibit us from memory. Lack of sleep. If you can't focus, if your brain isn't, fully equipped, is not going to remember very much. That is why cramming is never a good idea, because you have a lot of stress, your sleep is not where it needs to be. And that's when you might have information like, right before the test, but then you'll lose it because your brain wasn't equipped to make it into long-term memory. Okay. So vocabulary words is a great thing to try to understand on flashcards. My daughter, studying for Spanish, she would have like the Spanish word and then the English word on the other side. Um, vocab words and language is a great way to memorize. But what we want you to really do in college is go beyond just memorizing and understanding. Okay. But things like words, language, that is a great way to learn it. Okay, so we're talking about different study techniques. Okay, first of all, when you're studying, one thing you should always do is block out things that would prevent you from concentrating. It could be your phone with all the notifications. Put on do not disturb. Put your phone on the other side of the room. That's another example. You can actually turn your phone off, right? So these are some things that you can do to help yourself so you're not distracted. Because if you're in the middle of studying and all these things are popping up, your brain is not going to be focusing on what you're studying. It's going to be waiting for the next pop-up. Okay. Another thing is you should find a good study space that is not your bed. Okay. A lot of people like to study on their bed, but that is the worst place that you can study because your bed is going to be calling to you and be like, oh, just take a little 20-minute nap because you're too comfortable in your bed. And I'm sure that there's people out there who said, okay, I'm going to take just a little 20-minute nap. And then 3 hours later, they wake up, right? You want to sleep if you're in your bed and you should not study there because of that. Okay, video games, that's a distraction. Anything with your phone or pop-ups, those are the worst things to do. Okay, there are also some myths with studying. Myth one is you can multitask when you're studying. You cannot. Highlighting is useful only if you're doing it in the SQ3R method. Because if you're highlighting the first time you're reading something, you don't know if what you're highlighting is really important. And then studying effectively is effortless. You have to put effort into your studying. It's not an easy process. Okay, some other good study strategies. Mnemonic devices. You probably have some. For example, PEMDAS with math. Homes, the Great Lakes, Lake Huron, Ontario, planets. My very energetic mother just served us nachos, okay, to learn the order of the planets. This is great in science classes, or just to kind of create something to organize a list of things or an order of things. Great for studying because you're using different senses in creating these mnemonic devices. Okay, also concept association. So for example, let's say you're learning about letters from a Birmingham jail and you went to the Martin Luther King Museum and you saw a plaque or you listened to a video about it, you're going to be able to understand more because you're connecting two different things together that you've experienced. Idea clusters. This is great if you're trying to remember something like, let's say, the person who invented, Eli Whitney, who invented the cotton gin. You could be like, oh, I knew a guy named Eli who drank a lot, right? Oh, cotton gin. Gin is a type of alcohol. You're trying to remember things, in a cluster, putting two things together. Okay. You should never just flat out just study for several hours at a time. You have to take brain breaks. This is really important for you. Um, Interleaving, like don't study the same subject straight. Maybe like mix and match it, like some math, some English, some history, so that your brain is never gets tired of one thing. Okay, so you want to mix it up some. Practice testing is a great way to study flashcards because you're testing yourself every time you flash it. Um, my daughter, again, when I'm talking about Spanish terms, she would have a thing of flashcards and then she would separate it into I got it and I don't got it pile, right? So she would go through and then try to get the I've got it pile at 100%. She would go through it over and over and over again until finally she understood all of them. Practice tests. Sometimes teachers will provide practice tests. If you have a publisher for your textbook, you can Google that, see if they have any, Quizlet, things like that. And also teaching the information to someone else. So if you're in a study group and you're like, okay, I'm responsible for teaching chapter 1, you're responsible for chapter 2, you're responsible for chapter 3. You're going to become an expert in an area, and teaching it to other people makes you more understanding about the subject matter. All right, so how your instructor teaches and learns is something to consider. If your teacher teaches in a certain way that works better for a study technique, you want to make sure that you're learning and matching what the teacher is doing, because that's probably how they're writing the test. So for example, let's say the teacher is all about long answers to questions. They might be doing a lot of essay questions, right? So you want to be able to practice how to write essays, because if that's how they teach, that's probably how they want you to regurgitate that information. Okay. Um, Try to always improve the way that you're studying. Um, if it's something's not working for you anymore, not a problem to change it up. Okay, so let's talk about prepping for a test and actually taking a test. Where I talk about the whole person approach and why it's important for you to be healthy when you're studying and taking tests, what you can do day of, and what to do about test anxiety. Okay, so good study habits help you take tests. That makes sense, right? So, and stress is not a bad thing if you're a little bit nervous, right? Kind of like if you took an AP test or if you've ever taken a final exam before, you might be a little bit nervous, but it's a good nervous, right? Kind of like when you're on a first date, it's a good nervous, right? It's kind of more of like an anticipation. So, a little bit of stress can make you do better because it means you actually care about it. And we're talking about problem solving with timing. Okay, so all things you should be doing for preparing for a test. Number one, you should always read everything that's assigned to you. Okay, always go to every class. Take notes during class. When you take those notes, you're going to review them, make them better, make them more organized. You're going to study throughout the semester. You're not going to study just before a midterm or a final. You should be studying consistently throughout the semester so that the information goes from your short-term memory into your long-term memory. The more you do it, the more it's going to go into your long-term memory. It's going to be easier to retrieve when you're taking a test. Reread parts of the book that the instructor focuses on, right? So reread those areas that they think are important. Create a study group with your classmates, because remember, teaching other people is a great way to learn. Take practice tests. Practice time writing. So if you know that there's going to be 2 essay questions, create some mock test questions. See how long it takes you to do those essays, because that's going to be important so that you don't run out of time on a test. And always get enough sleep, at least 7 hours a night. Okay, so make sure to do what that previous chart says for every class. Um, the whole person approach is important. You want to make sure that you were healthy, you have enough sleep, ate breakfast before you take the test. Those are all really important for your body to be able to do what it needs to do for you to be successful. Be honest with yourself about tests. Some students are a little overconfident when they take tests and then bomb it. So you want to make sure that you have studied enough for every time. If you need accommodations for test taking, make sure to tell to your instructor or student accessibility services, and make sure that you go to study sessions and you review before every test. Okay, some great apps to help yourself in studying. You probably have done some, Quizlet, this Chegg Prep, different memory games. All this is going to make you a better learner. Okay, so let's talk about day of the test. Okay, so now you've prepped, you've studied, you're good to go. Always get there a few minutes early. Take out everything you need. Take some deep breaths. Don't really talk to other people. Just kind of focus on yourself so that you can be in a good mindset to start. And then when you're taking the test, make sure that any last minute instructions. Also, kind of like the SQ3R method, look through the test first if it's a paper test. Scan over it to see how many questions there are. Say, okay, I have 2 hours to take this. There's 50 multiple choice questions. That means I could get 4 minutes per question. If you're ever spending more than that, you might want to skip it, come back to it. And then using the first review, um, see how much time you want to dedicate to each section too. If it's like multiple choice, short answer, and essay, kind of like give yourself your own little time, time limits. Answer every question, right? Um, Always go back and recheck your work too. One thing that sometimes happens is the instructor will mess up and on question 20 might give you the answer that they were asking in question 1. So for example, let's say it said, George Washington, who was the first president of the United States? It was multiple choice. Question 20, they might say, George Washington was the first president who was, the second, right? And you're like, oh, I remember that question, so sometimes they give hints without meaning to. Read all the choices. I know everyone's been burned on one of those all the above. They saw, question A was correct and they click on it and it's like, oh no, all of them were correct, right? So sometimes you rush through. So read all of the available questions. Answer all parts of the prompt. If it says list and explain, some students just see list and forget to explain, and that gets them, a really bad grade because they didn't do the hardest part. Um, if you have no idea about a question, skip it, come back to it. Especially if it's an open book test, people are like, oh, well, let me try to find it. And it takes them forever to find it because they don't know it. Just skip it, come back to it. I've had students who have not been able to do the essays at the end of their SLS midterm or final because they spent so much time trying to find the answers ahead of time. Now, the midterm and final in SLS is open book, but that does not mean you don't study, because if you have no idea where the information is or what the concepts mean, it's going to take you too long and you're not going to be able to finish on time. And make sure you complete the entire test. After the test, you probably are going to be anxious until you get your grade, right? But understand that test anxiety is real. There are some ways that you can help combat that. We have the counseling psychological services help you as well. Some strategies you can use. You can just prepare yourself. That's the best way to combat test anxiety. The more you're prepared, the less anxious you're going to be about it, right? When you're in the real world, you're also going to have tests, right? You may not think about it in the same way, But being prepared for those are important too. Kind of like going on an interview. That's kind of like a test, right? Because they're testing whether or not they want you to work there. So the more prepared you are for that, the better it's going to be for you to get a job. So you're just kind of getting ready for that real world experience throughout college. Okay, so in summary, taking tests will always be a big part of college. So make sure that you are preparing yourself now for those harder classes down the road. Lots of different ways that you can study. Make sure that you are, serious about your learning. Mix it up a bit. Try to figure out the study strategy that works best for you. And make sure you use all of your resources available to you, like Student Academic Resource Center, supplemental instruction, the Writing Center, and the library. Okay, so that is it for chapter 6. I go ahead and stop recording now.